Which side in the Rugby Championship do you think will be the happiest with what they've seen so far? And I'm not purely talking about wins and losses here, otherwise it's a pretty stupid question and it's a straightforward answer. It's South Africa. I'm trying in this video to look at the broader picture. So welcome back to the channel. The comment section is where you can have your say. Out of the 4 teams, who do you think will be happiest? And what I'm looking at is where they were at the end of last year coming into this season and where they want to be right here, right now. Because I think that changes the way in which you approach this question. You might end up getting to the same conclusion and it still being the Springboks. But I'm going to speak through each team and just kind of give my thoughts on where I think they are and how happy they will be with where they are at the moment. And you can do the same whilst you're here as well. Like the video, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. But as I say, welcome back. So yeah, I was kind of thinking about this, not just in a purely 2 games played, who's won their games, that's South Africa, they're in the best position to win the whole thing, but kind of looking at it as where were these teams at the end of last year with the World Cup and coming into this year, and realistically, where will they want to be right now? Because I think that does change. I don't think it's as simple as they want to be as dominant as they were at the end of last year. In some cases, that might be the case, but in others, this is a building process, right? So let's start off with South Africa. The world champions, back to back, kings of the world, top of the world at the end of last year, coming into this year. Where do they want to be? I think they haven't wanted to see any sort of drop off. And in terms of the performance, we can maybe get onto that. But I think ultimately for South Africa at the moment, it is about winning now and also still trying to prepare for the future, which is a combination that is incredibly difficult to achieve. And out of any nation, I think the Springboks have got the best balance of that. Certainly over the last World Cup cycle, I think they got a really good balance of that. And they're continuing to do that this year. Look, it hasn't been perfect. Their performances, even in their test victory against Ireland, I know a lot of Springbok fans were kind of saying, well, we've got a lot of improvements to make here. It hasn't been perfect. They obviously lost the second test in that series. And they've won 2 games against Australia where, frankly, it has been a mismatch. These 2 teams are in very, very different places at the moment. But also, even in those wins, I think there has been a sense of great 2 wins, good stuff, some really nice things to focus on and be pleased about, but they can get better. So I think overall for South Africa, they will be happy. How can you not be? You're in the box seat to win the Rugby Championship. You are a team that compete with and often beat the best teams in the world, but it's also a team that you're starting to see develop. Spoken about it a lot already on the channel. I think his name will continue to get mentioned a lot over the coming weeks, months, and probably the next few years as well. Sasha Feinberg-Mngomezulu looks really exciting at fly half, but there have been others as well. Afalele Fassi has come in and been playing pretty regularly. I'd like to see a bit more of Grant Williams, actually. That's probably one of those guys I really want to see given a bit more of a shot at starting at 9, but we've seen Buthelezi in the back row. Loads of others, a whole load of others that completely disappear from my mind at the moment. But I was at that Wales game at Twickenham where there was loads of new faces, good players coming through. So I think overall for South Africa, they're happy. The performances could be better. I think that's exciting given the fact they're still mainly winning their games, but they'll be pretty happy with where they are at the moment. Let's get into the other teams. This is where it perhaps gets a little bit more nuanced. So New Zealand. End of last year, runners-up in the World Cup final, a final which could have gone either way. They end up losing it, but they were still playing some really, really good rugby at that time. That quarter-final against Ireland, for me, was my favourite game of that World Cup. I know the one between the Boks and France the following night, some people might pick, but they were playing some seriously, seriously good rugby. And then the question then is, where do they want to be now compared with where they were? And this is where I think it's different with South Africa, because new coach, new captain, and a number of very, very experienced, very good players having retired, they are in a different position. It does have more of a sense of a rebuild. With South Africa, it's kind of a continuation of where they were whilst trying to bring players through. With the All Blacks, it feels like more of a rebuild. So 2 wins against England in the Test series, matches that could have gone either way, but I think that's England's missed opportunity, even though I didn't really hammer England for that. Some people thought that they should have won one. But anyway, 2 wins against England, 2 games they could have lost, but they won by a narrow margin, always a sign of a good team. Then defeat to Argentina, but they bounced back absolutely brilliant in typical All Blacks fashion to then win the second test they played against them. So I think naturally there has been a drop-off from the All Blacks. I would imagine, and this is where I'm a neutral observer, so New Zealand fans can let me know in the comments. I would imagine that most New Zealand fans will be very, very comfortable with where they are at the moment. It hasn't been perfect. It was never going to be perfect. But there's been so much change. It is a new era. And given the track record of Scott Robertson with the Crusaders, everyone's going to be pretty confident that he will get them to where they need to be. And this is the start of that process, not the end of it. And I think there are some really exciting things as well. I think Damien McKenzie at 10, I've loved seeing him get a real stint at fly half. I know Richie Mwanga is a loss, and Robertson would probably want to select him if he could, but he can't. I love the fact that they've had McKenzie giving him a proper go at 10. I think Tupu Vaihi as well in that forward pack has been pretty impressive. I mentioned him in the last video, but Blackadder coming in as well. I think you are starting to see the development of that New Zealand team. And 3 wins out of 4? Disappointing loss to Argentina, but overall I think you'd be content, wouldn't you? If you're an All Black fan, you'll be content with where you are. The test matches against South Africa are going to be a lot more revealing for exactly where you are and exactly where this whole rebuild is, I think, in South Africa against the world champions, your biggest rivalry. It's going to be awesome. On to Argentina. So where were they? 4th place at the World Cup. They were probably a bit disappointed not to finish 3rd at that World Cup because it was a pretty rubbish game in the 3rd place playoff against England, a team that were very beatable. They have beaten recently. They lost them in the pool stages and then lost in that playoff game as well. But even so, a good World Cup, I think, for Argentina. They were in a good place and they've kind of continued that really, haven't they? They've had tough fixtures to start the year. When you look at France touring there, I know it was a very changed French team. It was nowhere near the full strength, but they had some decent test matches against the French. Great win against New Zealand, something which I think more than any other team over the last few years, but Ireland actually are probably the ones that have also done it. But they've done that a few times against the All Blacks in New Zealand. I feel like for Argentina, the big challenge for them is coming up now against the Wallabies. Because big win against New Zealand, then they were beaten comfortably in the second game. It has always been, I think, about when they're the favourites really delivering. And they will be the favourites against Australia. They should beat Australia, I think, based upon what we have seen so far this year from both of these sides. But they have to go out and execute it. Let's see if they're able to. The other thing I suppose you'd say is strength in depth for Argentina. There are some more senior players that you would have thought are getting towards the end of their careers, particularly in that front row. We saw it, didn't we, against the All Blacks in the second test where New Zealand won comfortably. The strength in depth in that front row got battered pretty comprehensively. It's absolutely crucial for them in terms of their performances and that Argentinian physical forward pack, which when they're at their best, we know how good they are. Do they have some of the depth coming through, the players coming through? That's maybe something that would be a slight concern. So for Argentina, again, they'll be pretty happy. For me, the big challenge for them is coming up against Australia. Speaking of the Wallabies, so the worst World Cup performance in their history. Like the lowest in the rankings, completely in the doldrums. So they're kind of building from the lowest base possible. But I honestly don't feel we've seen too much to get excited about. There are players here and there. I think we can see what Joe Schmidt is trying to do. And I think he, as a very methodical coach, detail-oriented coach, will get improvements from this team. I don't think we've necessarily seen that straight away so far this year. It was pretty poor test series against Wales. Yes, they won those games. And then the heavy defeats to South Africa. So I think the impression I've got from the Australian public and the rugby public is because it's such a start of a new era, because they were at such a low ebb, they're happy enough. They're willing to give it time. But I still think you need to see something. I want to see something a little bit more, I suppose, from the Wallabies, from what we've seen so far. So out of all of that, which side will be the happiest? South Africa are the obvious answer because they're 2 from 2. They're kind of continuing along the path they were on last year. They've dropped off slightly, but I think that's to be expected on the back of a World Cup and when you've got new players coming into the team. And then I think maybe Argentina, just because of that win against New Zealand. And I think if they do beat Australia, which they should, then I think Argentina will be really, really happy with the position they're in. But what do you make of it? I find it an interesting way to look at it when you consider where they were and where they want to be and expect to be right here, right now. The Springboks is probably the correct answer. I think possibly Argentina as well. Definitely Argentina. I think if they win their games against the Wallabies, I guess you could say the same about South Africa though as well. Definitely the Springboks if they win their games against New Zealand. So let me know in the comments, which side do you think will be happiest so far with where they are? I'm not purely speaking about results here. Let me know. Like the video whilst you're here. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a single thing on the channel. I appreciate you watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.